Great to see you here this morning. We're in a series on 10 commandments. But just before I start, we have a scavenger hunt. One of the Great Commission, there's a lot of greats in the Bible, the Great Commission is to reach out to our community. And one of the things Andrea puts together is the scavenger hunt. And so this is a great opportunity to get to know people. If you don't know people, it's a great opportunity to put your mission on. And it's a great opportunity to show love to our community. So she just needs people to help out. And I really want to challenge you to just go out, sign up, and say, I'll help. That's this coming Saturday. I'll help for an hour or two. Just put my name down, tell me what you want to do. The other thing I would say is we have, this is a busy Sunday for us. We have all church prayer tonight, and then afterwards a women's event. I really encourage you with prayer because it's really the heartbeat of a church. A church that prays sees God work. A church that doesn't pray just sees man work. And so that's why Paul prayed for this roof. Yeah, it is something to ask somebody for $500,000. I just, oh man, alive. But it's just what is there, and we're trusting God, and we're hoping that he moves in our hearts and provides for us. And so that's just, when you pray, God works. But when you work, right? And that's true of our families, whether church or our own families. And I don't know if you know, but there's a prayer wall we have on our website. You can, if you got prayer requests, we have a prayer wall. You go on, you can write the prayer request, and then people man that and watch that. And so use that. That's a way to get people praying for you. Just go on to our website, springvale.org, and then find prayer, and then go there, and you'll come across the prayer wall. So this week, I was listening to an 85-year-old telling a story about his life. Apparently that week, he had been going through the drive-through at McDonald's. And he was a little confused with the menu, and so he was taking a long time to order, and then he heard a honk behind him. Somebody was hitting the horn. Hurry up. And he looked in the rearview mirror, and there was a young woman there that was hitting her horn and kind of had a frustrating look on her face. Will you just order and move on? It's McDonald's. The menu's been the same since 1973. Just order. That was kind of the attitude he was getting. So he finished his order, and he drove up to the first window, and he paid for his order and paid for her order. Yeah. Just wait. And then he moved up, and the woman then went to the first window, and he could see in his rearview mirror, and she found out that he had paid for her order. And so she was like waving out the window, thank you, mouthing, thank you, thank you, thank you. So the 85-year-old got to the second window, and he presents both receipts to the drive-through attendant and says, I have paid for both meals. I would like to have both meals. And so he took the two meals and he drove away, and he thought to himself, that will teach you some patience. Now you're going to have to go around and start it all over again. And I thought to myself, boy, you can learn some interesting things from older people. I would love to see the look on her face when she found out she had no food and had to go back through that line again. You know, older things can teach us important lessons. Older people can, but also older commandments. I was kind of surprised this week. Last week, I had a number of people say to me, man, I'm so excited about this 10 Commandments series. I have never heard a sermon series on the 10 Commandments. And I thought, is it because they're not relevant anymore? What has changed about the character of God in Moses' day, 3,500 years ago, that it makes it no longer relevant for us to study about what righteousness is in the eyes of God? Because the moral law, as we talked about last week, there's 3 different kinds of law, but the moral law is a reflection of what is good and what is righteous and what is prosperous, what is kind. That's what the reflection of the character of God is, and the law reflects that. So last week we started and we did an intro, and we learned that the 10 Commandments were given when? After the people had been redeemed and rescued. So you've got the rescue of the people in basically the first 19 chapters of Exodus. So God gets them when they're in slavery and rescues them miraculously out and calls them his people. And then he gives the 10 commandments and says, now as my people, this is how you are to live. Not, the 10 commandments were not, like a lot of people in our world believe, you obey the 10 commandments, you earn salvation, you're good with God. But that's not how the Bible describes them. We're not redeemed by keeping the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments are a guide for the redeemed, those who are part of God's family. So they are meant to teach us, now that I've chosen to follow God, how then am I supposed to live? That's what we learned last week. So this week we go into the first and second commandment. I'm going to put these two together. The first, and God spoke all these things, Exodus 20 verse 1, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I've already redeemed you. Now here's how you're to live as my people. You shall have no other gods before me, command 1. Command 2, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep or obey my commandments. So let's stop there. These are kind of like two sides of the same coin. They're different commands, but they're closely related. The first one is worship the right God. The second one is worship the right God the right way. And both of those are still relevant to our lives today. Worship the right God. So let's say you're, first of all, let's remember Jesus in John 14:21 said, if you have my commands and you, okay. Just take a guess. Yell any word you think is right. If you have my commands and you obey or keep them, you are the one that loves me. The commandments are not about duty, though they are a duty. They're not about earning. They're not about drudgery. They're about love. Let me just ask you this. Is it love for a wife to keep the command to be faithful to her husband? Or is that duty and drudgery? One of the highest expressions of love is for a man or a woman to exclusively love their spouse. So let's say you were at work and you have a young woman come working for you, probably mid-20s, say, and she's really down and you say, hey, what's wrong? And she comes into your office and you sit down and she goes, I got married about 6 months ago. It's been wonderful, but last week my husband came in and told me that he's found another woman that he loves, but he still loves me as much as he always did. And so because he loves both of us, he's going to live with me some nights and days and live with her other days and nights. And his hope is that the three of us will be truly happy together. Now, what is your advice going to be? Most of you, maybe not all, most of you are going to say, there are something to the effect of, there are some things that are not to be shared in this life. They are too sacred, and a spouse is one of them. You don't share your spouse with anyone. And so you need to tell him, you either love me and be committed to me, or we're done. You can't share that relationship. It's not designed to be shared, and anytime it is shared, it results in incredible pain. And that's what God is saying here. You don't share your love with another God. It's me or it's not me. It's me or it's not me. Now, Jesus said in Mark chapter 12, Jesus kind of rephrases this. So I've heard people say that you have the Ten Commandments, and then you hear Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount and in the New Testament, and he kind of takes them to the next level. And I would say to you, that is not accurate. I would say that Jesus is a commentator that explains to us the depth of the commandments. Because Jewish scholars before Jesus understood the ramifications of the Ten Commandments. They understood that to hate someone is as bad as murdering them. And so when Jesus tells us about these commandments, he's not upping them to a new level. He is telling us what God really meant by that and what we're supposed to understand. In Mark chapter 12, one of the teachers of the law came and heard Jesus debating with some religious leaders and noticed that Jesus had given a good answer and he says, of all the commandments, which is the most important? And Jesus said, the most important one is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. That is the great commandment. So, when God says, you will worship me and me alone, there is to be no other, Jesus interprets that to say, this is what God means. You will love him with all your mind, all your soul, all your strength, everything that is in you. God will have first place in your life. Is that relevant to today? Or is that just the truth for 3,500 years ago? I'd say that's fairly relevant. But we go, well, thankfully we have no other gods. I mean, I come here to church, and in all my time here, you've never had an idol or another God. We worship Yahweh, we worship Jesus, and so we don't have to worry about that. Check, I have it. But hold on a second. Can you truly say every day you get up that you love Jesus with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind? I can't say that every day since the day I put my faith in Jesus to be my Savior, that I have prioritized God in that way. Now, fortunately, I was reading a book. I can't remember what book. It was years ago, probably like 10, 15 years ago when I was a teenager. I was reading this book. No, I just feel like that, right? I don't look like that. But from the inside, it just feels like that, right? Those of you that are getting older, you look at the world the same way until you try to do something physical and you ache and hurt all over. And then you go, I guess I really have changed. But looking out, it looks all the same. So I remember reading this book. I was a brand new Christian. And the author, I think it was Jerry Bridges, but I'm not sure. He said, when you come to Christ and you surrender your heart to him, it's like your heart is this mansion. And with this mansion with many, many rooms in it, and you are giving the keys of the mansion to Jesus. And so he owns the mansion. So you're saved. You're a follower of Jesus. You've been redeemed, you're rescued. You're no longer in slavery to sin. You've been rescued out of it by Christ. But then he takes the keys and he enters into the mansion, and then he goes about into every room. And he opens the room and he opens the blinds to bring light in, and he clears the dust and the grime away, and he repaints and he resurfaces and he refurnishes it so that the room can be usable. And then he moves on to another room, and then another room, and then another room. And he's going through the mansion, making it suitable for God to dwell in. And that is a metaphor of my heart. That I gave Jesus my heart. I was sincere. I was 17. I prayed the prayer. I poured out my life. I was sincere about it. I've been sincere about it. But I've got all these rooms in my heart that he's been working on for 40 years now. I've got a room for money. I got a TV room. I've got a sex room. I've got an emotional room. I've got an educational room. I've got a family room. I've got a wife room. I've got a religious room. I've got a learning room. I've got all these, a work room. I've got all these rooms. I've got a forgiveness or not forgiveness room. I got all these rooms in my heart. And Jesus, because he owns my heart, goes through each room and starts to work on it. Now, I have found that rare is the room he goes into one time and does a complete work on that room. Usually it's he comes in and does some work and I have to adjust to it. And then he goes off to another room and I have to adjust to that. And then he goes off to, and then it comes back to that same room, changes a little bit more. And the only way I could ever love Jesus, love God with all my heart, all my soul, all my strength, all my mind, is that when he comes into one of those rooms to clean it up, I obey what he tells me to do. See, that's the response. He comes in and cleans, but it won't stay clean if I don't obey. And it's no wonder that this is the first command. Because if you get your relationship with God right, it'll affect everything else. In fact, I would say, you get the first two commands right, the rest come rather easily. Well, I have a fighting chance. Let's put it that way. Maybe easy is the wrong word. That there is God and there's none other. And my life and my heart is for him, and every time he calls me to obey, I will obey. Now, I'd be lying to you to say I always obey just like that. God says, do it, and I'm on it. You've known me long enough to know, and I think I've told you enough stories to know that there are times I struggle. And so this would be the prayer I would ask you to make as we go through this series, this commitment. Lord, whatever you say, give me the strength and grace to do. Whatever you say, I will obey. Pretty simple prayer, but life-changing. Lord, whatever you say, I will obey. And if you're struggling with what God calls you to obey, then feel free to go to somebody else and say, I think God is saying, I'm not sure if this is what he's saying. I got to figure that out. Or this is really hard. How would you do it? Or I don't really want to do this, but I know God's calling me to. Will you help and pray with me and help me get through this? Because I want God. Or maybe your prayer is, God, I want to want you as we're talking about these things, these rooms in my heart that you're going to deal with through this series. Because I want to love you with all my heart, all my soul, all my strength, all my mind. Now, here's a question that will haunt you. So plug your ears if you don't want to hear it, because this is going to bother you, this question. If you won't obey God, then who are you truly worshiping? If you will not obey God, then someone or something is above God. And that leads us to our second commandment. Moses says, you shall not make for yourselves an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or waters below. Now, he says that because you're going to have somebody go, but what about this instance? Or what about that? Or what about this image? And God's like, okay, look, I'm going to just say it one time so it's pretty clear. If it resembles anything in the heavens above, the earth around you, or the depths below you, and it's out of bounds. Is that clear? Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. Now, I had a question. I went through this and I said, where did idols come from? I never had that question before. Do you know idols do not appear in the Bible until the story of Abraham? The first 12 chapters or so, first 11 for sure, there are, well, actually in chapter 11 is you see the first idol. So the study of Genesis 1 through 11 is a fascinating study. So if you want to do a Bible study that is really going to help you understand the full Bible, get in that study. We have great teachers, Lillian, Lester, I think Dustin is teaching a few, Barb Hill's going to be teaching, I think, and a few others maybe. But that Bible study is incredible. In the first 11 chapters of Genesis, there are 3 rebellions that happen against God. You ever ask, why is this world so broken up? Because of the 3 rebellions. You're familiar probably with the first one, Adam and Eve with Satan. That's the one we tend to emphasize the most. But as you walk through the first 11 chapters of Genesis, you come across chapter 6, where the sons of God see the daughters of men, and they go copulate with them and produce an offspring called the Nephilim. And this sons of God are divine beings who leave their rightful home or realm and interact with the women of the earth. That's the second rebellion. And God destroys the earth, but we find, that's why the flood. It got so bad that God destroys the earth, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And Noah is an image of Christ, a metaphor of Christ, figure. The third rebellion is Genesis chapter 11, where if you link it in with chapter 10, where one of the Nephilim lead the people of the earth. Well, that's an interesting saying. The people of the earth. And they have been given the command by God to spread throughout the earth and bring the earth under rule of God through them. We are God's rulers on this earth, to bring it into submission and righteousness and goodness. That's supposed to be what we're doing. And in chapter 11, they get to the plain of Shinar and they go, this is a pretty nice place. God, I'm not going any farther. We're staying right here. Forget your command. We want to be here. And by the way, we're going to build a tower in which we will worship a God to replace you. First idol. Now, if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 32, you will see, verse 8, you will see that God says, okay, it's the preface to Romans 1. Okay, I will give you over to what you want. I will remove myself from oversight of you, and I'll replace that oversight with the sons of God. And from that point on, idols began to proliferate the world. And the idol is meant to draw humans away from their innate sense they need to worship something and give them something to worship other than God. And that's why God says, no idols. They are designed by the evil one to take your focus, your understanding, your values, and shred them so that you adopt values and focus that is ungodly and will lead you into blindness away from God. That's what idols are all about. In Psalm 82, we're actually told God judges those sons of God because they were unfaithful in their oversight and used the oversight of the nations as a means to gain their own glory. And they did it through idols. So, I'm sure now you're saying, well, good thing we don't use idols here. I don't see any stone statues or wood statues or anything hanging that, we bow down to, say a few prayers and, go on our way. So check, I'm okay on this one. You sure? You sure we're okay? Look at what he says. It's interesting what Moses adds to this command. He could have stopped at no images, earth above, on earth or below, nothing, no image, don't make anything. Could have stopped there, but he doesn't. He says, you shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, here's the reason, because I am a jealous God. Now the term jealous, when it was originally brought into the English language, meant a passion for what is good and righteous. It's been kind of morphed in its meaning today. So jealous has a negative aspect to it in our world today, but the term that's used here, the closest one we can get is jealous. And it's the same thing. Harken back to that story I told you about the woman that came into your office and, her husband's now found another. And for you, when she acts with jealousy, you don't go, you shouldn't be jealous. You say, you should be jealous. That relationship that you have is very exclusive. It's sacred, and nobody should be stepping into this. You should be angry. You should be jealous about what he is doing, because that's what is right and good. You're protecting your marriage. Well, that's what God's saying here. I'm jealous. I'm jealous for the heart and the relationship of every person. And you can't worship other gods, and you can't worship me the way you want to worship me. You have to worship me the way I tell you to worship, because if I leave you on your own, you will veer off into other idols. You will not understand the truth, and you will be lost. Now, I've heard people say, no, not here, never here. I've heard people say, well, they don't sing the right kind of music at that church. They don't run Sunday school at that church. They don't preach the Bible the way I like it preached. As if those are the things that when you do them, make you right with God. Sometimes we replace worship of the heart to God with our own preferences and what we feel comfortable with and what we like, and they soon become an idol. And we judge a church by what we deem important. By the way, God never said anything about the style of worship, the method of preaching, or the kinds of songs we sing, or the programs we run in the Bible. In fact, if you go through the history of the church, he's been changing them for 2,000 years. And yet we make them an idol. Here's another idol. I know what God's word says about not getting connected with an unbeliever, but I just love him so much. And surely God would understands, and it's okay because I feel like it's right. Sometimes our feelings become an idol. Not what does God's word say, but what do I feel like? As if our feelings are the way God directs us to worship. Whenever our feelings are in conflict with the word, God expects our faith to kick in and to trust him when our feelings are leading us astray. Be very careful how you make decisions about God in your life of worship based upon your emotions. Our feelings can be an idol. See, we don't have tangible material idols today. We have immaterial, intangible idols in our heart. Let me finish because I'm quickly coming to an end here. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to thousands of generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, in order to understand this phraseology that Moses has given us, we have to look at it and observe it. This is any good Bible study. So here's what I see in this. First of all, the contrast between third and fourth generation and thousands of generations. Clearly there's a contrast being made in these verses. You see that God judges or punishes those that what? Hate me. But you see that God blesses or shows love to those that what? Love me and keep my commandments, because you love God by obedience. And if you think about it, the average generation is 20 or 30 years. 1,000 generations would be 30,000 years. By the way, we don't have 30,000 years of human history. We got about 7, maybe, of written human history. I don't know what was going on before they wrote, because nobody's, been there. Whatever happened before people start writing, well, we're not really sure. Archaeology starts to tell us some stuff, but we've got about 7,000 years of human history. That's just a guess off the top of my head. So clearly this is not literal. Here's the point. When it comes to disobedience to this, the judgment will be clear and exact on all those that hate me. And the implication is why he says he'll punish the children for the sin of the parents is because what you as a parent do trains the values and understanding of God to your children, and they pass that on to their children, and they pass it on to their children. And so if each generation is going to worship God, and by the way, when you look in the scripture, as each generation moves and they start turning from God, they get further and further and further away from God. And God says, my punishment will be clear, it will be exact for those that hate me. But for those who love me and obey me, unlimited. This is one of the first indications that God's thinking beyond our life here. He's talking about eternity. The term 1,000 is often used in the Bible to speak of eternity. It's so large, people couldn't count it. It's just beyond your mind. And it's so big that it speaks of, it's used to be a metaphor for eternity. Now, people can count it. I shouldn't have said that. But it's just so large that they think, well, that's just forever. That's the meaning behind it. So what God is saying is, for those that obey, I will bring life to you. For those that disobey, there will be death. This is a very personal thing with God and us. I have to ask myself, if I'm not willing to obey God, then exactly who am I worshiping? Because I put someone or something over God in my life. And God says, no, the start is I'm number one in your life. In every room in your heart, I'm going to work with you. And we're going to make me number one in your life, because not only were you created to be that way, but when I redeemed you to be my people. And the relationship I have with you is unlike any other relationship. I am God, you are man. And I designed you to worship. And true love from me to you and you to me starts with you worshiping me and me alone. And wherever in your life I point out that something is going awry, then you reform your life to obey me. And that's love. We don't ever have to worry about God reforming, because he's perfect. He always loves. He always does what is right. He's always true to his side of the relationship. It's us. Hence, there isn't 10 commandments for God. So as we go through this series, the first question is this: do I truly worship God first? Or is this a game I play? I'll come to church, I'll pray before my meals. I'll send the kids to Sunday school. But Monday through Saturday, there'll be no difference in my life. The way I act and the way I talk and the way I think and my values will be the same as the world around me. I won't be any different. So God is calling us out and saying, start here. And so the question for us is to say, do I truly seek in my heart to worship God first above all other things? And I prove it by obeying him. And are there things in my heart I'm demanding of God that if he won't reach them, if he won't do them, if he doesn't fulfill those prayers, that I'm not worshiping anymore? They're idols. Am I willing to make him first and to put away anything that interrupts that relationship? Why don't you bow your head? Spirit, this is your time. It's your time to challenge us through your word. Father, this in some ways is an abstract thought, to make God first. What does that mean? Well, it means you're first in how we act sexually, how we spend our money, how we give our money, how we talk to our kids, how we talk to employees, how we talk to our boss, how we handle when people hurt us, how we drive, the things that we watch on TV, the movies that we go to, what we're learning, how we spend our time, whether or not we share the gospel with others. All of these areas are meant to be brought into submission to you. And I'll be the first to stand up and say, God, all those areas aren't in full submission. And I have found there's areas I thought were in full submission, and then you walked into that area of my heart and said, yeah, not really. Here, look at this. And so I pray for a heart, a humility among us to love you enough to obey you.